James Peterson had always been a reasonable man. After 15 years as a structural engineer, he finally saved enough to purchase his dream home in the upscale Oak Ridge Estates. The Tudor-style house with its spacious yard was everything he wanted, except for one unforeseen problem: his next-door neighbor, Cynthia Wilkins. Cynthia, the self-appointed president of the Homeowners Association, had earned her Kara nickname through years of meticulous rule enforcement and boundary policing. At first, James tried to maintain a cordial relationship, waving when they crossed paths and keeping his property immaculate to avoid her scrutiny. But 3 months after moving in, James returned home from a grueling business trip to find Cynthia's SUV deliberately parked across his driveway entrance. When he knocked on her door to ask, James didn't want to act rashly. As an engineer, meticulous planning was in his blood. He spent weeks researching local ordinances, HOA restrictions, and historical property design elements. He discovered that Oak Ridge Estates had been built on land that once housed a 19th century manor, and the development's charter specifically allowed for historically accurate restorations of original architectural elements without requiring additional approval. His investigation took him deep into the archives at the County Historical Society, where he befriended Eleanor Blackwell, a retired history professor who volunteered there 3 days a week. Oak Ridge Manor was quite the architectural marvel in its day, Eleanor explained, carefully unfolding yellow blueprints protected in acid-free sleeves. Built in 1887 by shipping magnate Cornelius Oak Ridge, who was rather paranoid about security after making enemies in the cutthroat business world of the late 19th century. What kind of security features did it have? James asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Oh, he was quite eccentric about it. Despite being miles from any significant body of water, he insisted on a fully functional moat with an operational drawbridge. Most people thought it was absurd, but architectural journals of the time actually praised its innovative engineering. Late one evening, James visited the county archives and found something incredible: original property surveys showing that the historical manor had featured a defensive moat and drawbridge. Even more fortuitously, the historical property line ran precisely where his driveway now met the street, exactly where Cynthia kept parking. He spent days cross-referencing modern property lines with the historical surveys, measuring his own property with laser precision. To his absolute delight, the historical moat's outer perimeter aligned perfectly with the modern curb where his driveway met the street. It couldn't have been more perfect if he designed it himself. James hired Marcus Chen, a lawyer specializing in property disputes, to review his findings. After examining all the documents, Marcus grinned and said, "This is entirely legal. The HOA charter actually protects historical restorations, and they can't stop you without changing their own bylaws, which requires a 75% vote from all homeowners. And when building a moat violate any city codes?" James asked, still expecting to hit a roadblock. Marcus flipped through his notes. Surprisingly, no. The city's historical preservation statutes actually supersede modern building codes for authentic restorations, provided they include proper safety features. You'll need to add railings, adequate lighting, and ensure proper drainage, but the basic structure is completely permissible. James also consulted with Dr. Catherine Reynolds, an architectural historian from the State University. She was thrilled at the prospect of helping restore a piece of local history. Most people just slap a commemorative plaque on their property and call it preservation, she said, examining his preliminary sketches. This would be a functioning example of late Victorian defensive architecture. The Historical Society will be ecstatic. James began assembling a team. He contacted Riverstone Construction, specialists in historical renovations who had recently restored the century-old fountain in the town square. Their foreman, Mike Donnelly, initially thought James was joking. "A moat? Around your driveway?" Mike laughed over the phone. When he realized James was serious, his tone changed to professional interest. "Well, that would be a first for us, but we've done similar water features. The drainage system would be the tricky part." For the next month, James quietly developed detailed engineering plans, consulted with historical restoration experts, and filed for the necessary permits with the city, carefully avoiding mentioning anything to the HOA as historical restorations were explicitly exempted from their review process. He ordered custom-milled oak from sustainable forests for the drawbridge, commissioned hand-forged iron fittings from a blacksmith who specialized in historical reproductions, and construction began on a Tuesday when Cynthia was away at her monthly spa retreat. James had scheduled everything perfectly, hiring a team of contractors who specialized in historical renovations. They arrived at dawn, and by noon, they had already marked the boundaries and begun excavation. The neighbors emerged from their homes one by one, coffee mugs in hand, watching with undisguised curiosity as the heavy machinery carved a precise trench where lawn met driveway. Eleanor from across the street was the first to approach. "James, dear, what exactly are you doing to your lovely property?" she asked, eyeing the growing pile of displaced soil. Historical restoration project, he replied with a casual smile. Did you know this entire development was built on the site of Oak Ridge Manor? I'm bringing back a small piece of local history. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. Some looked concerned, others intrigued, but all were united in their unspoken question. What would Cynthia say? Mike Donnelly, the construction foreman, approached James with a low chuckle. Just got a call from someone claiming to be from the Concerned Residents Committee. Wanted to know if he had proper permits. Didn't identify herself, but sounded like she was calling from a car. James checked his watch. Spa day must have ended early. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, a white Lexus SUV screeched to a halt across the street. Cynthia emerged, designer sunglasses perched on her head, face flushed with what appeared to be a combination of a recent facial treatment and rising indignation. The crowd of neighbors fell silent, watching the drama unfold like a live theater performance. When Cynthia returned that evening to find heavy machinery digging a 6-foot-wide, 3-foot-deep trench around James' driveway entrance, she marched over with her HOA rulebook clutched in her manicured hand. What do you think you're doing? This was not approved by the architectural committee, she shrieked, phone in hand, already recording the confrontation. James calmly handed her a thick folder. Actually, Section 7.3 of the HOA Charter specifically exempts historical restorations from committee approval. I'm simply restoring the original moat that existed on this property in 1887. All the documentation is here, along with my city permits. Cynthia flipped through the papers, her face growing redder by the second. This is ridiculous. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. Feel free, James replied pleasantly. My lawyer will be happy to attend. By the way, you'll need to move your car. It's parked in what will soon be 3 feet of water. As Cynthia stormed off, the construction foreman gave James a discreet thumbs up. The other neighbors, who had quietly gathered to watch the confrontation, broke into scattered applause. The next day, James arrived home to find a bright orange stop work notice taped to his mailbox. It looked official at first glance, with the Oak Ridge Estates letterhead prominently displayed but lacked any official city markings. He promptly took it down and continued to his house, where Dr. Reynolds was waiting to inspect the progress. The stonework will be crucial, she explained, examining the trench. We found fragments suggesting the original moat used locally quarried limestone with distinctive fossil inclusions. I've located a quarry that still cuts from the same geological formation. The construction continued at a remarkable pace. Mike's team worked with precision and enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the uniqueness of the project. The trench was lined with geotextile fabric, then a layer of crushed stone for drainage before the decorative historical stonework was added. Modern waterproofing techniques were discreetly implemented beneath the authentic-looking surface. By the end of the week, plumbers had installed the recirculating water system and electricians had wired the hidden lighting. The most impressive feat of engineering, however, was the drawbridge mechanism itself. Designed to look like a traditional rope and pulley system, it actually employed a sophisticated hydraulic lift concealed within hollowed-out wooden beams. The emergency HOA meeting was a disaster for Cynthia. James and his lawyer presented their immaculate documentation, complete with historical precedent, city permits, and the explicit exemption in the HOA's own charter. More significantly, several other homeowners spoke up about Cynthia's years of harassment and selective rule enforcement. The Moat project continues as planned, declared the HOA vice president, overriding Cynthia's protests. And furthermore, the board will be reviewing all recent violation citations issued by President Wilkins. The meeting room erupted in applause. James remained composed, though he couldn't help but notice how Cynthia's carefully constructed facade of control crumbled as neighbors lined up to share their stories. The Garcias described how she demanded they change their unauthorized patio furniture, which had been in place before Cynthia even moved to the neighborhood. The Johnsons revealed she had issued 3 separate citations for their daughter's basketball hoop, each citing a different bylaw violation. Even Gerald, the treasurer, admitted she had blocked his attempts to make HOA financial records more transparent. This isn't about a moat, said Eleanor, rising shakily with the aid of her cane. At 82, she was the oldest resident in Oak Ridge Estates. This is about a pattern of behavior that has made living here increasingly unpleasant. Mr. Peterson has simply found a creative way to address what we've all been suffering through. Cynthia didn't surrender easily. Over the following weeks, she called city inspectors daily, filed noise complaints, and even attempted to block the construction vehicles. Each time, James was prepared with proper permits, scheduled work hours, and video evidence of her interference. One morning, James arrived at the construction site to find Mike Donnelly in a heated argument with a water utility worker. This lady called claiming there was a water main emergency at this address, Mike explained, pointing to Cynthia's house where she stood watching from her window. The poor guy drove all the way out here for nothing. 3rd false alarm this week. The local police became so familiar with the situation that they began declining to respond to Cynthia's calls unless she had specific evidence of violations. Officer Rodriguez even stopped by occasionally during his patrol, not to investigate complaints but to check on the progress of what he called the coolest home renovation I've ever seen. Despite the obstacles, the construction progressed rapidly. The moat took shape, a 3-foot deep, 6-foot wide trench surrounding the driveway entrance. Modern drainage systems were disguised with historical stonework. The engineering was impeccable, the aesthetics surprisingly elegant. Dr. Reynolds brought a group of her university students to document the construction as part of a project on historical restoration techniques. Their enthusiasm further legitimized the project, with several architectural blogs picking up the story after the students shared photos online. "You created quite the teaching moment," Dr. Reynolds told James as they watched the students taking detailed notes on the stonework techniques. "This is precisely the kind of practical preservation that brings history to life." The centerpiece was the drawbridge, a masterful combination of historical appearance and modern functionality. Crafted from oak and iron with hidden hydraulics, it could be controlled remotely from James's phone or car. When raised, it made the driveway completely inaccessible from the street. When lowered, it was sturdy enough to support any vehicle. Cynthia's final desperate move came in the form of an anonymous letter to the local newspaper, claiming the moat presented a drowning hazard to neighborhood children. James immediately invited the newspaper's reporter for a personal tour, demonstrating the shallow depth, gentle water flow, and extensive safety features. The resulting article, "Modern Moat Meets All Safety Standards While Preserving Local History," included an interview with the city's head of historical preservation, who praised the project's attention to detail. "It's not often we see private homeowners investing so thoroughly in historical restoration," the official was quoted saying. "Mr. Peterson's project sets a new standard for integrating history with modern living." As word spread about the project, James' home became something of a local attraction. Neighbors drove by to witness the progress, and local history enthusiasts praised the authentic restoration. A reporter from the local paper wrote a feature about bringing history. 6 weeks after breaking ground, the moat and drawbridge were complete. James planned an unveiling celebration and invited the entire neighborhood, including Cynthia, though he knew she wouldn't attend. The morning of the event dawned clear and bright. James had hired a local catering company to provide refreshments, set up a small tent with displays about the history of Oak Ridge Manor, and even arranged for a string quartet from the community college to provide period-appropriate music. Dr. Reynolds had helped create informational placards detailing the historical significance of various design elements. "This is far more than I expected," Marcus Chen, his lawyer, commented as he surveyed the elaborate setup. "I thought we were just celebrating a victory over a neighbor dispute." "It started that way," James admitted, "but somewhere along the line it became about something bigger. The history of this place, bringing the community together." By noon, nearly every household in Oak Ridge Estates had sent at least one representative. Children lined up for the miniature drawbridge demonstration James had built as an educational display. Adults clustered in groups, many meeting neighbors they'd barely spoken to in years. Mayor Sophia Williams made a surprise appearance, drawn by the growing publicity surrounding the project. "When I heard about this restoration, I had to see it for myself," she told James, accepting a glass of champagne. "The city is always looking for ways to preserve our local history while allowing for modern development. You created quite the template." The local historical society arrived in period costume, adding to the festive atmosphere. Their president, Harold Jenkins, presented James with an ornate certificate. "On behalf of the Oak Ridge Historical Preservation Society, I'm honored to present you with our annual Heritage Preservation Award," he announced to applause. While most recipients simply maintain historical facades or restore vintage interiors, we've brought a functional piece of our town's past back to life. The finished moat was a thing of beauty, stone-lined with recirculating water that flowed gently through hidden filters. Underwater lights created a soft glow at night, and small water plants added a touch of natural elegance. The drawbridge, with its authentic creaking sound and medieval appearance, delighted everyone who saw it in action. "Can you make it go up again?" called out 8-year-old Lily Garcia, jumping with excitement. Her parents, who had once been targeted by Cynthia for their unauthorized garden gnomes, beamed as James obliged, pressing the button on his phone to activate the mechanism. The heavy oak drawbridge rose slowly, its hidden hydraulics silent, while the exposed gears and chains, purely decorative but visually convincing, clicked and rattled impressively. Water trickled back into the moat as the bridge reached its full upright position, earning appreciative gasps and applause. "I've lived in Oak Ridge for 20 years, and this is the most impressive improvement I've ever seen," remarked Gerald Thompson, the longest-standing resident. "It's both functional and beautiful, and it adds a unique historical touch to our community." Eleanor, the elderly neighbor who had spoken up at the HOA meeting, approached with the help of her walker. You know, dear, my late husband would have loved this. He was a history buff too. She paused, looking around the gathered crowd. I haven't seen the neighborhood this animated since we used to have block parties in the 90s before everyone got too busy and well before certain people made everything so unpleasant. The local historical society presented James with a Heritage Preservation Award, and 3 other homeowners inquired about historical elements they might be able to restore on their own properties. The HOA vice president even suggested adding historical restoration options to the community's official architectural guidelines. We're thinking of creating a guided walking tour of the neighborhood's historical features, Gerald told James, now speaking in his capacity as the newly appointed head of the Community Enrichment Committee, a position created just that morning during an impromptu HOA board meeting held beside the moat. With your permission, we'd like to make this the centerpiece. As the celebration continued, James found himself drawn into conversations with neighbors he'd barely known before. The Smiths from 2 streets over discussed their plans to restore a Victorian-style gazebo. The Guys shared old photographs they'd found of the original Oak Ridge Manor. Even Mike Donnelly, the construction foreman, mingled with guests, proudly explaining technical details to anyone who asked. Throughout the event, Cynthia remained in her home with the curtains drawn, but everyone noticed that her SUV was now properly parked in her own driveway. Over the following months, a strange peace settled over James' corner of Oak Ridge Estates. His driveway was never blocked again. In fact, all the neighbors became oddly respectful of property boundaries throughout the community. The moat became something of a neighborhood landmark. During holidays, James would decorate it with themed lights, orange at Halloween, red and green at Christmas. In summer, he added water lilies and installed a small waterfall feature that children loved to watch. What James hadn't anticipated was how his project would transform the social fabric of Oak Ridge Estates. Neighbors who had previously hurried from car to door with barely a nod of acknowledgement now stopped to chat. The moat became a gathering point where conversations naturally flourished. I used to know everyone within 3 blocks, Eleanor told him one evening as she paused during her daily walk to rest on the decorative stone bench James had installed beside the moat. Then over the years, people got busy or afraid of violating some rule or another. Your moat changed that. The most surprising development came 2 months after the unveiling. Gerald Thompson knocked on James' door one Saturday morning, accompanied by several other residents. "We've had an emergency board meeting," Gerald announced without preamble. "Cynthia has resigned as HOA president." "Resigned?" James repeated, stunned. "Voluntarily?" Gerald's expression was diplomatic. "Let's say she recognized the changing tide of community opinion. The board voted unanimously to appoint a new president, and well, we'd like it to be you." James was momentarily speechless. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. My relationship with Cynthia is precisely why you're perfect," interrupted Maria Gonzalez, who had recently been elected to the board. "You stood up to her, but you did it through creation, not confrontation. You found a solution within the rules, not by breaking them." At the quarterly HOA meeting, Cynthia was voted out as president. The new board was led by Marcus Edwards, a retired judge who promised fair enforcement of the rules and encouraged more community input. After some consideration, James declined the presidency, but agreed to chair the newly formed Historical Preservation Committee. His first initiative was to create a comprehensive guide to historically appropriate improvements that homeowners could make without lengthy approval processes. James's story spread beyond the neighborhood. His moat was featured in architectural magazines and even inspired a segment on a home renovation show. Property values in Oak Ridge actually increased, with real estate agents highlighting the historically conscious community with unique character in their listings. The spring after the moat's completion, Oak Ridge Estates held its first community festival in over a decade. Tables lined the central park, children ran between lawn games, and for the first time in years, residents relaxed without worrying about potential violations. James' moat served as the backdrop for the official group photo, with nearly every household represented. The most unexpected change was in the children of the neighborhood. Inspired by the moat, they developed an elaborate game involving historical restoration missions, complete with hand-drawn maps of imaginary historical features hidden throughout the community. Parents reported with amusement that their children were suddenly interested in local history, architecture, and even engineering. "Tommy wants to be a moat designer when he grows up," laughed Sarah Johnson as her 7-year-old son carefully examined the drawbridge mechanism during an educational tour James had organized for the neighborhood children. During this tour, James noticed a familiar figure hovering at the edge of the group. Cynthia's teenage son, Alex, was watching with undisguised fascination as James demonstrated how the drawbridge worked.